always a weird one when the Champions League is over, yet you still have a Champions League match to play, and it's against a team that you really need to beat. Not at home, of course it was on the road, but you need to beat Viktoria Plzen. Fortunately, Barca did that. It wasn't pretty, so let's get into it. Some good, some bad, and 5 headlines from Barcelona's 4-2 victory over Viktoria Plzen in the last game of the Champions League group stage. Headline 1 is Ferran runs wild. Between Rafinha and Ferran Torres, there is a man of the match somewhere in there. Rafinha, his 2 assists. Between he and Ferran Torres dropping in deep, that was a big part of how Xavi was able to break down Viktoria Plzen's kind of weak, I don't really call it a low block. It was a medium block. They were trying to counterattack. They did have some success with it, so I don't want to disparage Viktoria Plzen. Barca dominated the first 20 minutes of the match. Viktoria Plzen kind of punched back. We're not able to get a goal until the second half, but certainly deserved at least one at home, that being Viktoria Plzen. That said, Barcelona's success offensively did come a lot through the middle, through Rafinha when he would drop in as well, and invert, as well as Ferran Torres dropping in and then making those movements off of that next pass, or that third pass and that third man run. And the combination between the two for the third goal was certainly the highlight of the match. For Ferran, his best moment of the season. Rafinha, not necessarily his best moment of the season, but it was a budgeting partnership that, because of Lewandowski, I don't know how much we'll see, but it was a positive thing to see these two work so well together. Rafinha obviously needed some kind of bounce back performance, getting calls this week that he might even be a bust, or really questioning the purchase of that player. And I think Ferran Torres, for as much success that he has, I mean, for this point, Ferran Torres could win the gosh darn Ballon d'Or, and I think people are still going to question whether or not the 55 million euros from Man City is too much for Ferran Torres. But after that insane miss that he had over the weekend, really good to see that coming against Viktoria Plzen in a match that Ferran Torres, not to say had to show up into, but it would have been really useful for his confidence if he's able to show up and have a big game against a team like Viktoria Plzen. Fortunately, he was able to do that. The 2 goals, not saying that this means that he is turning a corner, but it is nice to see what Ferran Torres is capable of. And with Lewandowski being the consummate starter, usually when we see Ferran Torres, we see him playing on the wing, or we see him underneath Lewandowski, and it doesn't look like it makes sense. But against Viktoria Plzen, Ferran Torres in that 9 position does surely make a ton of sense. And while it is a bit negative here, if Torres in that first half and if Ansu at all were a bit more clinical, and it does make me feel terrible that I feel like, one of those FIFA badges that says that Ansu was clinical. I feel like I had to take that badge away. He's just not clinical anymore the way that Ansu used to be. He can always regain that, not at this moment. But if those two were actually on target, and that even towards the net, the way that Viktoria Plzen's goalie was today, not great. Barca probably could have won that game 7-2. Headline 2 is Pablo Torre on display. As we enter the holiday season, you start to walk by stores and see those holiday displays. And I felt like we saw both of the different kinds that you might see in the Pablo Torre performance today. Some window displays make you want to go into the store, and he definitely had those moments in the second half that made you want to see more, even aside from the goal, which was a tremendous finish. He started to look more comfortable working with Ansu and Balde, and that was really important. And I did feel like with Pablo Torre, not to defend him a little bit, but I felt like with he and Alba, there was a stiffness to that, I want to say, lack of partnership. And as the elder experienced player, you do put some of that on Alba. It felt like there was only one way that Alba could work with the youngster, and Alba was also basically playing as a left winger, and that meant that Pablo Torre had to do something he really has never done in his career, and that is defend. Thinking back to his time when I saw him at Racing Santander, they really did protect him, and his job was to be an attacking midfielder and be the focal point of that offense, and be always on the ball and work tirelessly on the offensive end in the final third. And defensively, he didn't really have too many responsibilities. As an interior for Barcelona, as you know, because of Barcelona's, not to say, we'll get to the defense in a second, but shambolic defense on the counter and in transition, those interiors have got to be smart. They've got to be positionally savvy and be in the right spots. And Pablo Torre, he lost the ball at times today. It was a rough defensive performance. It was also rough when he was in his own half of the field. Not great from Pablo Torre at times. Again, he's a young player. You kind of expect that for a player that is kind of getting his first real, actual full minutes since the Olat friendly to begin the preseason. The other concern for Pablo Torre was that he consistently didn't track his man. And in the Barcelona midfield, that trio there, if one of the three even does not defend, and when I say defend, I mean track their man, all the way upfield, whether on the counter or not, in transition, a slow transition, a build-up, then Barcelona are going to have worries at the back. And Pablo Torre did not consistently track his man at all. And those are the kind of things that you hope that players pick up on and get better through training, through reps, And there is hope for Pablo Torre on that end of the field. But certainly, as far as his progress, it looked like he was still in its infancy. So going back to that window display analogy, we saw the window display that you take one glance at and then you kind of power walk past. And then again, we also saw, not to say the best of Pablo Torre, but we saw what he is capable of on the offensive end and just how natural he is in the opponent's final third. So we did see some elements of that today, really hot and cold from Pablo Torre. And I hope to see in the future much more of the former, that being just a fine performance and a good performance where he looks confident. And again, I'm hoping that defensive part of the ball does improve, tomorrow. Headline 3 is high and A-Low-nso. Okay, that pun is terrible. Terrible. But my question for you, what is more terrible? The performance of Alonso and Bellerin, there you go, there's another pun there. As far as the lows that Bellerin and Alonso had today, what's worse? Those puns or some of those performances today, it was rough going along the back line for those two in particular on the evening. While Alonso did score the first goal, got forward, you see what he's capable of offensively, which is, I would argue, one of the reasons why Xavi wanted him and why Barcelona decided to sign him from Chelsea. But on that second goal in particular, it kind of summed up the very low, the rock bottom for Bellerin and for Alonso on the evening. Bellerin, caught between two minds, was, again, kind of floating between two offensive players who, for Viktoria Plzen, were way too close together. Yet Hector Bellerin wasn't really defending either, didn't close out on either, way too much time for the cross to come in. And then Alonso, the cardinal sin of, you either clear the ball or you pick up your man and try to push him off his spot. And Alonso did neither. So didn't clear the ball, misjudged the cross in, and his man wide open, easy shot on goal, and easy goal past Peña. Nothing the young goalkeeper could do on that second goal. And when you put it in tandem with a PK that's not really in form, and as I said, an Alba that was basically playing left wing today, it was a recipe for disaster. And being a Champions League game, but also being the one that doesn't matter, I don't know how much to read into these really, really poor performances defensively. What I can tell you is that for Alonso, obviously he's not the left center back in any capacity when Eric Garcia and especially Koundé and Araujo and Christensen, when any of those players are healthy, we won't have to see Alonso at the center back position. So my hope is that this is the final game that I have to watch Marcos Alonso as a starting center back for FC Barcelona. Where he's useful and where he's used the rest of the season, other than being a backup for Balde, I'm not sure where to put him. For Bellerin, even 2 weeks ago, even a week ago, because I hadn't really seen him, and even against Bayern Munich, it was kind of unfair to have him thrown into that situation. So there was a little bit of defense as to why he was totally undressed by Serge Gnabry. But for Bellerin, clearly after a performance like today, I said I don't want to read too much into it, where you have a Frank Kessié, a pivot out of position playing in front of you, and Pablo Torre, as I said, who's just learning how to defend. So not much protection for that back line, but my goodness, for Bellerin, that 50-50 split that I believe is for some responsibility where, as I said, there is no A choice at right back. It might be Koundé, it might be Araujo. And then you have a B1 and a B2 when it came to Roberto and Bellerin. But no, I think there's an A that doesn't exist. Then it's Roberto. Then it's Bellerin as your C choice at right back. Not to say that one performance can change whether or not a player renews or signs a new contract. But unless Barcelona are truly desperate, this is the kind of performance. This is the kind of 90 minutes from Bellerin that can have a board, can have a technical director and Jordi Cruyff and Matteo Alemany and Xavi going, yeah, maybe we don't try to renew this guy. That's how rough it was today from those two. As I said, it's hard to blame and read too much into a match where you know that everybody was kind of in second gear, but still, you have to expect better from them. 4 is more, if not for Peña. I do, as bad as I was on the back line, want to praise Iñaki Peña. While unfortunately he was unable to sustain his reputation as a penalty kick stopper, that's something he's done to good effect throughout his career. There is some variance to that as well. There's science done on this and videos and things you can watch. It's a little bit overplayed as to having these specialists. Tim Krul, the old Newcastle keeper, was one of those examples of a guy that we thought of as a penalty stopper. And you do see in international competition guys who have that reputation. But he did have a little bit of that reputation with Barça B over the last few seasons in particular. But yeah, he can't stop a penalty kick. As I said, the other goal, nothing he could possibly do on that. That was a defensive breakdown. But Iñaki, otherwise, this game could have been worse if not for Barcelona's backup goalkeeper. It's a Champions League, so of course the Barca goalkeeper is going to have not much that he can do on these goals. He's going to concede in the Champions League. But with those 6 saves, clearly better than the Viktoria Plzen goalkeeper, and that wound up being the difference when the game was 3-2. Even in the first half, Iñaki Peña had some good saves. I don't think he had any one save that you can point to and say, hey, that was an excellent save. That was a save that's a particular highlight that's going to get me a job somewhere at another team someday. But Iñaki Peña was solid on the evening. And again, a big reason why this one wasn't a worse result for Barcelona. And headline number 5 is this didn't matter. So as I said, I really went in on the back line. I was pretty rough on them in the same way that I was rough on Eric Garcia over the weekend before he went out. So yeah, some poor performances on the back line. As I told you, I kind of went in on Pablo Torre a bit there too. And I didn't talk anything about Franck Kessié just to end that midfield trio with Gabi. I thought Gabi was good today. I don't really have much bad at all to talk about Gabi. I thought Gabi was one of the better players on the field, along with Rafinha and Ferran Torres for Barcelona today. Again, A-Low-nso was kind of, not even hit or miss. He was kind of just miss and miss off target today. Unfortunate for A-Low-nso. But Franck Kessié, yeah, he looked a bit out of position. And it's one of those where, again, just like with this makeshift lineup, there's young players getting their first appearances. And there's, players like Alba and Piqué who are not starting or not featuring at all when other players are healthy. So it is hard to really glean much from this game. In the case of Kessié, starting at the pivot, I don't think that Xavi obviously wanted to do that. We haven't even seen much of him as the interior, and clearly he just looked out of place. Unfortunately, that hamstring injury looked concerning. At this point, when I'm recording this, no updates yet, but yeah, that looked even more worrisome than what we saw from Koundé and Eric Garcia, and we know that they're out, maybe even until the World Cup. So for Kessié, I just hope he can stay healthy. I hope something works out. I hope he can, feature. Even for the next game, we'll have to see. I can't expect we're not going to see him for a few weeks, or at least until the World Cup break and after that. But for Kessié, yeah, a rough injury. But again, it comes off a performance that wasn't so great either. As the pivot, he kind of did the job that he knew he has to do, and that is to drop in, help out the center backs with build-up, try to defend his best. But yeah, positionally, he wasn't winning those 50-50s. This is something that reputation-wise, again, don't think that Kessié is just some kind of physical ball-winning threat because of what he looks like. That's a bit unfair to the player that he is. He actually isn't that player. He's a player that is much more industrious, is much better at getting into passing lanes, and then quickly countering and playing the ball. Actually, one touch is something that he's always been good at, but he's having a little bit of difficulty acclimating to that with Barcelona. So being a pivot for Barca does not fit his skill set, and it didn't on arrival, and it definitely didn't today as well. Again, having Pablo Torre work with him, not to say a recipe for disaster, but certainly didn't work. And I was reminded this game, on paper and in principle, doesn't really matter at all, especially when Marc Casado and Alvaro Sanz came in late in that game. I'm glad we got to see a little more of Marc Casado, who does make more sense of the pivot than Kessié. He looks natural at that position because that's the position he plays. Don't know where he's going to fit in the future. We're going to talk more about that on the podcast. Same thing with Alvaro Sanz. I'll talk about where I think he fits in, the greater Barca or La Liga or his footballing career as that moved forward. But we did see him make a late cameo as well. So the midfield combinations we did see today, other than maybe the Copa del Rey, maybe the first round of the Copa del Rey, I can't imagine we're ever going to see a Pablo Torre, Gabi, Kessié midfield ever again, that trio. So again, it's hard to really read in too much to a match that truly didn't matter on paper. But hey, I tried my best. I think we enjoyed it. It's a 4-2 victory, and we move on to now what truly matters, the final 2 games before the World Cup break. So I hope you join me for those. Hopefully we can have a little bit of fun with those. And until next time, as always, Forza Barça.